To get started with polymodeling, I want to introduce you to the different components, what makes it different than NURBS modeling. I have my shelf, my polymodeling shelf. This is what we're going to be using. There's a number of what are called polyprimitive objects here, and these are basic shapes. You want to think of them as hunks of clay, let's say, from which you'll mold or model your object from. And so you can, use these basic geometric forms. You can also manipulate them by manipulating their components. Let's start with a sphere and press F to frame it up. I have my polysphere here, and it looks like it has a kind of curved form, but if we zoom in, we can see that what is generating the appearance of a curve is actually just a number of what are called vertices, which are the intersecting points here. A number of vertices close enough together that as they connect in a straight line, it appears as if a curve is forming. So polymodeling are made up of primarily vertices in space that are connected by edges, and those edges form faces, and that all of the faces together form the object. If I right-click on my object, I can see my different component modes. Object mode is what I'm working in now. If I go to face mode, I'm able to select individual faces. If I go to edge mode, I can select individual edges. And vertice mode, I can select individual vertices. So this is how we model. In Maya, we will be working in the different component modes and using the transform tools. Move, scale, and rotate in order to be able to change the form. So let's go see how this looks. I'll select this vertice here, and I will move. Right now I have it. I'm still on snap to grid here. I'll move this vertice, and you can see that now I'm changing the look of my model. Before I do that, let's go back to object mode here and look at our attribute editor. For all polyprimitives, we have this node here, polysphere node. This allows us to change the initial appearance of our primitive object. So I have, the radius of this sphere, which I can adjust, but more importantly, our subdivision axes and heights. So subdivisions basically are how many vertices, and then subsequently how many edges and faces makes up this model. So we have a general sphere form, which basically puts the placement of those vertices, relative to each other in a spherical way. But how many are we adding to our model? So I can decrease this, and you can see that the kind of resolution of my sphere starts to go down. And I'm generating a different looking object. And now we can see that a sphere is really just a multifaceted arrangement of vertices in a spherical pattern. Okay, so this is how I can generate my initial hunk of clay, And what's important to note, and I had mentioned last week about topology, it's something we'll be talking about more next week. But topology is just the flow of these vertices, the flow of these edges basically around our model. You can see that here they come to a point, and in the last video I mentioned quads and tris. So here with a sphere we have a number of quads, and then they all meet together in a number of tris, and I have a vertice here that is connecting all of these faces. And so this becomes important to the overall modeling process, is where the placement of these vertices, placement of these edges, and what is called like these edge loops, or the flow of the model. So something to keep in mind. The other thing that you'll notice about really adding objects in general is that when I hit any of these polyprimitive objects here, I get a certain size, 1 unit by 1 unit popping up in the center of my workspace. If that's not the case for you, it's because you have create. And if I go to my polyprimitives here, I have interaction completion checked on. Right now it's checked off. This is how I like it, but I did want to show you that if you have that checked on, then when you go to to place a polyprimitive in the workspace or in the viewport here, it's going to pop one on the grid, and you're going to be dragging and setting. You're going to be interactively creating the primitive in your scene. So this is another way that you can kind of, let's say, model buildings easily, is by using that interaction completion mode. Okay. So I just wanted to let you know that that is available to you for you to kind of be building more interactively within the workspace. But for modeling objects, I like to work kind of numerically and methodically. So I'm not interested in this interactive creation turned on. So I'm going to turn that off. But I did want you to see that that is a way that you can model, or if you're not having this happen, that is why. The other thing is under create here. So I have a lot of primitives listed in my shelf, but I also can have a bunch more here in my create menu, something like a helix, for example. And again, any of these primitives, before you model any components of them, once you start modeling, or once you start manipulating individual components of a primitive, you'll get this tab will no longer be accessible to you. But right now I can use this to generate the kind of helix structure. So there are a lot of these different basic forms that we can start with under create or using the shelf. But what I did want to say also is that if all of these different polyprimitives have options, and those options are similar to the options that you see here in this particular poly node. So let's say I want to set, and if I do set any of these and I go ahead and create, right now I've created a cube in the center of my space that has a dimensions of 2 by 2 by 2. Those, if I've set those options, it's going to inherit those options in my shelf. So if I hit this, now my cube is automatically going to have a 2 by 2 by 2 scale. So to go back and to undo that, I'm going to have to go back to my options here. And again, I can type in a value of 1, or I can go to edit and say reset settings, and it will reset the default settings. Go ahead and hit apply. Now I'm generating a cube that's 1 unit by 1 unit. Okay, another thing that I want to mention in this video is, I'm going to go ahead and delete these. Different ways of kind of organizing your workspace, or how to combine different objects together. Okay, there's a couple different ways, and one of them is to do it hierarchically. So let's say I have this sphere here, and this sphere is the sun, and I am going to make planet Earth somewhere out in orbit. Right. And so let's say I want to rotate the sun. I want the Earth to come with it, right? I want to move my solar system. Well, I can group them together. And so then I would be like I did in the last video. So I can select both of them and hit Command G. And now I can move this whole group. So that's one way to kind of make a connection between these two separate models, but they maintain their autonomy from each other. Another way is to parent them. I'm going to undo that group. Another way is to parent them, and parenting creates a hierarchy between the objects. So one way to do it is to say edit and parent, and you're going to parent the selected object to the last object. So in this case, if I want to make the Earth a parent of the sun, I will do that, and I'll hit Command P, or just P, excuse me, just P. And now what I have is, and that was the other way around perhaps, let's see. Oh no, that's correct. And now what I have is the Earth can be moved independently from the sun, but anything that the sun does, the Earth comes with it, right? So these have a different kind of relationship, a parent-child relationship. If I rotate the sun, it will rotate the Earth with it. But the Earth I can rotate on its own, independent from the sun. So it still maintains its own kind of local transform parameters, but the sun, anything that happens to the sun will also happen I'm using the word son. In a parent-child relationship is different than a, solar system one, but I have the parent object. Anything that happens to the parent object will also happen to the child object, scaling, rotating, any of it. Okay, so that's one way to have a relationship between two objects. Another is what you saw in the last video, which is to combine two meshes. I can select both of these and go to mesh and say combine. So what that's done is it's transformed both of these spheres, and here I still have these transform nodes. So with the transform nodes themselves, and you can see this little icon is a transform node, I can still, if I haven't deleted the history, independently move these two, but the mesh itself is one mesh. Okay, so it's treated as one object in the scene. And then if I went to edit, again, delete all by type history, that means now that these two are locked in position together. I can't move them independently. The transform node is gone. And so I can't just select one. They're both the same. They're the same object. Even though they're not physically connected, they are the same object. If I want to separate them, I can go to mesh, separate. And now I have another transform node here, but I have my two models now, polysurface models. And I can go ahead and select them and edit, delete all by type history, and it should get rid of those transform nodes. And if not, I can select both of these and unparent them. The best way to unparent something is to press the middle mouse wheel and just pull them out. Delete this transform node, and now I have my two separate meshes again. Although now they're named differently. It's not P-sphere 1 and 2, now it's just general polysurface. The last thing to show you is something called Boolean. And a Boolean allows you to combine. So if I went ahead and combined these two, let's try something here. Let's delete these. I'm going to create a series of two more spheres, and let's kind of put them right next to each other and overlapping. And I'm going to duplicate this pair a couple times to show you the different Boolean functions and what they do. And maybe one more. Okay, so this first pair here, let's go ahead and go combine, right? And I want to show you working in wireframe mode for a second by hitting 4 on my keyboard. Now I can see the interior, and I'm just seeing again, that's 4. 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is shaded with texture, and 7 is with lighting, okay? So let's hit 4, and so we can see just the wireframe. And you can see that after I've combined these two objects here, that they do overlap, and they've maintained all of their mesh information even while where they're intersecting each other. So the interior of this mesh is kind of complicated. Let's hit 5 to go to shaded mode. Let's select this other pair here. And in this case, what I'll do is I'll do what's called a Boolean function, and I'll go mesh Boolean, and let's do a union bool. So I've selected these two, and what a union bool does is you can see down at the bottom, this help line here. What it does is it fuses two objects together. So now let's hit wireframe mode, and now you can see that where the combine has maintained all that overlapping mesh information, what Boolean has done is it deletes all of a union bool deletes all of the information of the meshes, like where they intersect, the interiors of them. And this is a really great way of generating a form that that has a kind of topology maintained, where we just have the surface of the object. We have one kind of skin on the object. It's just one continuous surface, and there's not any complicated overlapping geometry. This is what you want. Let's try a different Boolean. Select these two spheres, go to mesh Boolean and say difference. And what this does is it will indent one object with the shape of another at the point of their intersection. So let's look at a difference bool. The difference bool will take the second object I've selected. Yeah, the second object. And it will delete from the first object that geometric form. Okay, and then the last one we have here is intersection, and this will generate and keep the forms in between the two Booleans. Okay, so those are different ways of combining objects. We have all of our transform nodes still here. And what that means is that I can still kind of manipulate the way this Boolean looks, because I still have the ability to kind of shift the original forms, even though now I have here, you know, this is one mesh, but my transform nodes allow me to still kind of manipulate the way this looks. Manipulate the original object's position information, or let's say, you know, scale. So to be able to do this, so that I can still manipulate that the original mesh, but we have maintained here that the Boolean has, you know, operation has completed. And then whenever I'm done, I can, you know, select my objects here, edit, delete all by type history important. Okay, now I have my four models. Now let's say the very last thing to end this video is, let's look at this layer editor here at the very bottom. The display layer editor just allows you to organize objects once you start to have multiple objects in your scene. This is something that's maybe more important towards the last project, where you're going to be generating an environment or an interior scene, or some kind of you're going to be modeling something more than just one singular object. Model something that has more complexity to it, maybe a couple different models. It can be realistic representational, it can be more surrealist or abstract. But if you have multiple objects in your scene, what you're going to want to do maybe is use this display, these layers here. And these are just display layers. So they just allow you to group objects together. So let's group these two. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new layer. This one will create an empty layer, and this will create a new layer and assign selected objects. So let's create that layer. And now you can see if I turn on and off the visibility, that's easier maybe than perhaps typing 1 or 0 here in visibility. You can just click visibility on or off here. The other thing I can do with this empty box is I can make this layer visible but not selectable, so it's a template, or I can make it completely visible, not selectable with this R, which is like restricted. So we have, I'm able to select things in the scene, I'm able to select my objects with this layer, or I'm able to say, well, I just have a kind of ghostly wireframe, so it's a template, or I can say, well, yeah, I have these objects in my scene, but I'm not able to manipulate them. And this is really helpful if you have things like background. You have some background objects that you don't want to be able to select. This is especially important for animating. And you just want to be able to easily select the objects that you want to move or that you want to manipulate in some way, that you stick everything in the background on a kind of display layer. Okay, I can rename these like combined and union. Again, always use underscores rather than so now I know what this is. This is my combined and my union bool objects here. Okay, so that's display layers. I can select an object. I can right click, and I can add selected objects to my current layer. Okay, or I can remove selected objects. Okay. All right, those are some of our basic points to start our polymodeling, and now we'll get into some older videos, but still just as relevant in the process of modeling to take you through the rest of the week.